he said in anticipation, is try to turn a bowl form of varying heights, but I want to turn it as though it is pierced by the wings, or the wings are pierced by the bowl, whichever way you want to say it. One of the things that I try to do is to not line it up so that the wings come out of the middle. When you start being conscious of design considerations, you need to start paying attention to things like the universal law of thirds. That's one of those laws of art that you have to learn before you're allowed to break the rules. Once you learn the rules, then you can break them, and we call it creativity. But if you don't want to create a static situation where the wings would come out of the center, it's just ugly. So you can make them come out a third from the top if you want to, but that looks a little bit top-heavy. So what I try to do is to make them come out 1/3 from the bottom, more or less. Sometimes it's the golden mean of 5/3 instead of 1/3, 2/3. That's my story that I'm sticking to. But what I'm going to do is to create a form inside the wings of the square piece or the rectangular piece of wood. So I'm going to start off pretty much like I did with the first piece. The first step is to put it up between centers, turn a tenon on it, but I'm going to use a piece of the actual wood itself for a tenon instead of a glue block this time. Ready to go?
So, Jamie, is that friction against the chuck?
Yes.
There's no serrations on the end of that?
All we need is the friction. The pin on the tailstock with it nice and tight up there is not going to allow this to go sideways most of the time. Right, Bill? Did you hear with the leg set at 36,000 RPM. Remember, this piece is fairly well balanced before I ever turn it or put it on the lathe. You do not do that with a piece of wood that is not balanced. These are fun to turn during the summer. They keep you cool. Makes it crack up here. So now I'm going to start working on these far corners again. Little bit at a time. Don't get free. If you have a piece on the bottom like this one that's not flat at all. So this is going to be the bottom of your tenon. Might make the wings come out flat, and I think those are very static. They just don't have much flow to the design. So I put a little sweep in it, a little swoop, and that way it gives it a little bit more of a feeling of life instead of just being a piece of board stuck through there. So now here again, this is going to be my tenon, and you can see I'm getting close to where I want those wings to be. Only in this particular case, I'm going to move them up a little bit. This is going to be fun because there's a knot right there that I didn't realize was there. Keep it nice and tight. good time to start off with a block that has some of the thin super glue to stabilize those edges where you're cutting into unsupported fibers of the wood, and that will keep it from chipping quite so much. Or some masking tape or something like that. That particular piece came out big time. But now we have enough wood up here, I can cut through that. Be a little more careful. Keep moving your tool rest as well. And it's a good idea to not do that on these pieces when the lathe is running. Enough said. For obvious reasons. Which is good. But we're simply preparing this thing to reverse it in the chuck jaws. So now I need to make my tenon to fit in the chuck jaws. You have a good solid piece of wood. It doesn't take a whole lot of wood to make a good tenon. Don't get too cocky. That has not quite gotten a good square edge right there.
So you have a 4-inch tenon?
So why?
4-inch tenon? 4-inch depth on your tenon?
I generally go about 3/8. And especially with a larger piece, you want to have a good secure tenon. You don't want to have a tenon that has any defects in it either.
Now, did you say before all the chucks are half inch deep?
So now step one is over. I can reverse it in the chuck jaws. Excuse me. Woo! Much better. Now at this stage, we need to remember which way it opens and closes, but it's not critical at this point.
That's what I got when we started.
I got a couple of notes. Started with the regular soup, the old notes with about 5-6% of jars. They work fine if you understand the shortcomings. But with the different variety of jaws available for it, it's hard to open up that flexibility. Because then you have to buy a whole bunch of other chucks to get. And don't forget, once you have the pressure on there with the golf ball, tighten that thing down, and this universal joint allows it to move laterally if it needs to. And it's also just a good safety feature. Now, don't forget we're going to make the shearing cuts on the bottom before we go inside, because of the fact that we have moved it from one direction to the other. It may not be running perfectly true. So you want to trim it out. Real tight bit. Get it in there nice and close, but not close enough to create a pinch point with the chuck jaws. It's awfully hard on your knuckles. Mainly what we're worried about is these tips out here. With this short tool rest, I'm not being able to run on the top of the rest itself. It's hitting the backside, which is not helping. profile as it develops up here. You can't tell what the tool is doing down here. You just can't see it. So you watch what's happening up here, and that will tell you what the cut was that you just made. If you made a bad one, it's too late. Okay, that's fairly flat. And except for that chip out, we're doing okay. So now that's the conclusion of step 2B once it's already sanded, and then we're ready to start hollowing out from the top side. Now here again, we're going to be taking a lot of wood off of here for a while, and in this particular case, I'm going to leave that ball there for insurance, for Bill's sake. Start out here at the edge. Don't start back in the middle and come this way, because remember, you want the mass of the wood down there to support the cuts. Decisions. We cannot keep cutting down this way, because then we're going to undercut the wood that we need to support the cuts here. So at some point in time, and it's going to vary with one type of wood to the next in the size of the piece you're turning, where you stop here and then start going back in this way, as we did with the previous piece. Because if you hollow it all the way out down here to the edge, this edge is going to be flexing when you're trying to make a uniform thick wing, a uniform thin wing, whichever. So at this point in time, this is a pretty good solid piece of wood. I can continue to take a few more cuts going in this direction before I have to start coming in from this direction. This is a hard cut. This is going straight into the end grain. This is an easy cut because I'm going diagonally across the grain. When you have the cells of the wood lined up like a bunch of straws, it's awfully hard to cut into the end of those cell walls. So you want to be making your cut diagonally across them, because then you can shear those fibers much more cleanly. To support these cuts out here. So now it's time to start going in this direction. And don't forget, once in a while, close, open. If I had opened the chuck jaws at that time, I just ruined the project, because probably I would not be able to get it back in the chuck in exact registration, which means then my wings are going to be a different thickness.
So now you're going into the end grain, right?
Right.
Now, do you hit that with the CA?
Yes, the end grain you don't need to. It's the side grain that's unsupported with no fibers behind it that cause you the split out problem.
So that would be what we're coming out.
Now we're going to start going in, because that's the only way that we forgot to move the tool rest. That's the only way that we can now shape our wings, at least in the lowest risk manner. These really get to be fun when they're about 20, 25 inches in diameter on my stubby. That knot just checked. Now I'm starting to make a peeling cut, and as I make the peeling cut going in, I transition right into that side shearing cut. Just drop the handle a little bit. Stand as the other one. Get that knot right there. This part of the process starts to look a little familiar, right? It's exactly the same way we did the previous one. See the shape is starting to form for our bowl or our pot or whatever you want to call it on the top. The criteria is still to have it confined within the wings of the piece. My criteria. You can make it any way you want to. I just think it looks a little bit better without having those flat sides sticking out there. Because I have a fairly tall top on this piece, and I still need to take some of this edge on both sides away, I'm going to have to undercut that edge a little bit. I can't reach down in there with the bowl gouge. That's when it gets to be fun. Because what I want is a good, crisp joint where the bowl meets the wings. I don't want it to be rounded over. I want to make it look like it has a good, crisp transition. And the tool that gets in there very nicely is a detailing gouge. Now, Doug Thompson's detailing gouges are different from most spindle gouges because the detailing gouge has more mass underneath the cutting tip. It's thicker there. I also relieve the heel so that I can get it into a more confined area. I actually use this tool for most of my spindle turning. I turn finials with it. It's a good all-around nice tool. So that allows me now, though, to get down into that confined area. But remember, you're going to be working pretty far off that tool rest, and you've got that chop saw spinning around there. So go lightly. One more last cut. Bill's getting nervous. top if you don't pay a little attention to it. I'm not going to worry too much about refining that shape so much more. I'll cut a little bit more off the top so it's not quite so large. Because what you can do now is you can roll that edge in so you can put a top with a little finial on it and double the price.
Could you turn that into a bowl at this point?
I could. It would just be a very deep bowl. It would be more like a cup or a mug than a bowl. Or I could just cut all that off, but then you're defeating the purpose of using all the wood. Besides, it's not nearly so challenging as it is to hollow it out. So I'm going to play with it just a little bit here.
Question, Dan.
Yes.
Tell me, this right here is wider than this. Is that? Did you want to get that all the same?
On a good day, yes. It's going to be his fault, too. And it's got me down in that spot down there. Now, there's one other tool that you can use to get down into a confined area like that. A parting tool. Thank you, David Ellsworth. You sharpen this edge or both sides by just drawing it on a diamond flat. But what you've created then is a nice crisp sharp edge there. As you make the parting cut going in with this part of the cutting tool, it is also making a nice smooth shearing cut with this part of the tool.
Is that a freehand grind on your detail guy?
I'm sorry?
Is that a freehand
Grind? No, I grind it with my one-way jig. The only difference is I move the leg just a little bit. I can show you on the jig when we get through, and I have a scribe line so I know which one is which for which tool. The trick with grinding with the jig is to get the exact same shape and sharp that you had just been working with previously. Freehand, you can't do that. Okay, now, don't leave this top part larger than the base, because now we can come back, since the base is larger, and I can cut a little bit of that away so that I get the match of the profile going through the wings. You don't want it to be different sizes, it just looks weird. Now we can get rid of the tailstock. Make sure that the chuck is tight and that you turned it the correct direction. So now I'm just going to make a quick hollow vessel out of this. You see the value of that plastic tube on here. Don't forget you can use a stone gouge like a drill. tool, the boring part. Don't stick your finger in there when it's spinning. I prefer to use my portable compressor. I did not inhale. Now, how many of you have one of these newfangled carbide tipped tools? This is number 5. This is the only one of the carbon tip tools that I really have much use for. It's a very nice hollowing tool. What happens to a lot of people when they first pick one of these things up, they will present it to the wood with the cutting tip flat. That is a guaranteed disaster because that will self-feed right into the wood. This tool is designed to be turned at about 45 degrees, and you use only a pull cut, starting from the bottom, coming out. Now I have some of the angled ones, but this is the one that I use the most. And the nice thing about it is the shaft is 5/8, the tapers down to 3/8, so you can put some muscle into this one while you're hollowing out. If you have a shaft that's any thinner than a 3/8, it has more of a tendency to flex and chatter, and that's when you have a real problem. Because it will self-feed if you try to go this way. Not a good idea to inhale. This wood is actually still a little bit.
What is that piece of wood?
Sugar maple. Hard rock. Which you wouldn't normally want to do it quite that aggressively. But what we're doing now is creating a shape, replicating the exterior shape on the inside, and especially with wood that has any moisture, the secret is to get the walls of uniform thinness. Any place where there's a differential in shrinkage is where there's a difference in moisture content, and that's where it's going to crack. The secret of turning green wood is to turn it uniformly thin so it dries at a uniform rate. And that's why it will not split quite as often. The best chance you'll have is to turn it when it's a little bit green, stick it in a brown paper bag. That's called a Polish kiln. You guys are asleep. But now I've been able to hollow this out. I can make it whatever size I want to as long as I use the wood that's still there. But then I can take a smaller opening, put a top on it, put a finial on it, double the price. You have that option as long as you do that with the initial plan and you select a blank that has enough wood to do that for you. You can't change your minds midstream because you can't put the wood back on. For example, now I can't make that top rolled in anymore because it's going to be too thin in here. But I have this glob object on top of my wings now. And at this point, we would sand out the inside. I need to dress up that edge just a little bit. So now I can make a top, put my finial on it. I've done all of the work that I can on this particular piece in this position. So now it's time to refine the base to match the profile of the bowl on top, or the pot, or whatever you want to call it. out of Brazilian rosewood, you'd be a little more careful with that. But what's going to make it work is the fact that we're going to put the tailstock back on. Oh, I didn't learn that lesson the first time, did I? And here again, we know exactly where the center is, because that's where we started. So there's no problem trying to get it run true this time. We didn't give it the option to get out of it. There's that. So now what we're going to look at is the profile of the top and make the base shape to fit. We hope. And you can see it better quite often when it's running than you can when it's static. A little bit more. Pretty close. So now we have a couple of options here. It might be just as well to go ahead and turn the rest of that tenon off. It's going to be awfully hard to match that profile with that wood. Here's where your shearing cut comes in handy. Shearing cut also is very good for taking off small amounts of material to allow you to trim things out that would be done with another. Of course, we didn't hollow this all the way down to the bottom, so we're not too concerned about where it is. But most of my pieces that I'm finishing the base on, I will put a recess in the bottom so that I'll have an area, if it were to get out of square and it were to sit on a counter and rock. If the entire base is one big block of wood, then you have to sand the entire thing away. If I make it hollow on the center, recessed in there, then I'll have a ring that is a much smaller area of sanding I'll have to take off. So, there's a really neat tool to do that. And I have never seen another replacement for it. And I don't see it now. All rats. I took it out to sharpen it, and I put it on. It's a screwdriver. A screwdriver with something like a 1/4-inch shaft to it, and I grind it at exactly the same profile that I do hollowing tools, rounded with a bevel on it of just a few degrees, and you can stick it right in here in this confined area and hog out just enough of that area to make a recess in the base. You might have to check your...
Lebanon?
No. It has to be ground. I put ground to leather. But that screwdriver allows you to get in there with a nice, what it is basically just a little spindle gouge, but it's a scraper. It's the same rounded tip, it's the exact same profile you use on your hollowing tools. But that allows me to get in there and clean up that base. And it's a tool that I don't know what other tool you could get in there with quite so easily and so safely. And the price is right because you always have an old screwdriver in your shop someplace that can be repurposed to make a handy dandy detail gouge.
You throw it on the board.
Say what?
You throw it on the board. The shape of the tool. You throw it on the board.
Side view. And the way you sharpen it,
Radius at the front of it, right?
yep. And the way you sharpen it is to take your dressing tool for your grinder, just round over the edges of the stone just a little bit, and you just go grip down one side, down the other side, round that off. I was flabbergasted when I went in to take a class with David Ellsworth in 1990. Being a little German, I had taken a tap holder so that I could take the square cutting tip out of my hollowing tool, put it in that holder, and use that to sharpen. Well, David says all you have to do is to take it with the tip still in the cutting tool and go zip, zip, and you're done. Duh. So anyway, I guess if you've been practicing as long as he does, he learns his things. So, there I more or less have. I'm not happy with that. Don't forget, I'm gripping this from the inside. You got to remember which way you're going to open or close it so you don't break the tip. Aside from the fact that we didn't hollow it out, it's, okay. Oh, I forgot. I need to put the nut knocker on.
Jamie, you said you do the same design twice over each diameter?
Well, similarly.
Stuff? You don't use the same concept to hold it on and everything?
Which part of it?
The way you started.
No, I would use a jam job. A big change. And I have a collection of them over the years that I've made. Here is a photograph of one of the most expensive pieces I ever did. That one was 21 inches square Coca-Cola. Now that's done with the stubby with the bed slid back. Where's my other stubby? Oh, well, that's when I can slide the bed back, and it allows me to swing 30 inches, which you can't do with most other lathes. But this is simply a bowl, more or less upside down, but it's square. Now, there are people who will make a square piece by gluing waste blocks onto the sides and the edge and the ends, and then they turn it and take it to the bandsaw and cut that waste block off when you're through. That's cheating. Any fool can do that. Where's the entertainment value? The other problem is you're gluing to end grain here, which is not a good joint. And I know two people who have done that, and that piece came disassembled and hurt them. That's because they were cheating. So I like to do it the purest way, and that is to turn it as one piece. You have lots of options depending upon how thick your piece is, all other kinds of design concepts that you want. Here again, this one could have been used with a top with a finial on it. You'll see there's quite a few variations of it over there, and it's entirely up to you what you want it to be. Do not be a wood turner that lets the wood tell you what it wants to be. There are such people. They're into metaphysics. Any questions about that? Let's talk very quickly.
Did you have started this with a faceplate mounted? I assume
I could have, but I wouldn't have.
Why not?
Because once you put the faceplate on and you put the screws in and you need to reorient it just a little bit, you're screwed. One of the nice things about starting things between centers is then you have all kinds of options about changing the orientation. And the only thing that I use a faceplate for is I have it on one of my lathes with a sanding disc on it.
I have this lathe, and I do 29-inch diameter stock.
Turn it
Turn
around.
it in. There's no way to bring the tailstock up when you're doing that. So
Yeah, and that's something you have to be careful of doing, because you're trying to make a lathe do something it wasn't designed to do, and it's not capable of doing safely. That's the same situation with people who will try to turn the headstock around and turn outboard with a freestanding tool rest. That is a serious recipe for disaster, because as you're cutting, that tool rest is going to lean into the wood. If you can brace it against the lathe so that it can't tilt into the lathe, that's okay.
I have the outrigger that mounts on. It comes around, that allows you to do 29-inch diameter.
Well, I'm always cautious of doing that, because what you're doing is exceeding the tolerances that the lathe was built for. If you try to put a big honking piece of wood on there, you're doing more damage to your bearings because you're overloading them for the loads that they were designed for. You can get by with it. You may pay the price eventually with the damage to your bearings. But here again, that's a priority. If you're going to turn big pieces like that, when you're starting to turn, everybody wants to turn big, humongous ball. And then they find that those things just beat the pee out of you while you're trying to do it, and the novelty wears off real quickly.